Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a really fascinating, maybe even a bit provocative idea from a French text that's over a century old. It's called Hypnotism, Religion by F. Regnault, published way back in 1897. And it asks this kind of fundamental question. Are our beliefs, our rituals, even those moments we feel are deeply spiritual, are they actually, tied up with how our minds work? So our mission today is to explore Regnault's idea. His premise, basically, is that human psychology, things like suggestion, maybe even hysteria, our need to explain weird stuff, has been this huge, often invisible, engine-shaping religion across cultures and time.
It really is a remarkable way to look at it. Regnault positions religion not just as a spiritual path, but almost as an evolutionary step for the human mind itself. And he makes this really interesting point about irreligion, the absence of religious belief. He sees it at two extremes. First, in the very earliest, most basic stages of human thinking, where maybe complex spiritual ideas just haven't formed yet. And then, interestingly, again, at the height of advanced civilization, where maybe highly developed reason starts questioning those beliefs. It suggests this sort of cycle, maybe, coming from and returning to non-belief, but for totally different reasons.
That's quite a framework to start with. So if religion is this kind of evolution of thought, where does Regnault think it actually began? It wasn't like grand revelations from the sky.
No, not according to him. He argues it started much simpler, with just basic, raw questions. Try to imagine early humans, right? They're living in a world they just don't understand. A rock slide kills someone, lightning hits a hut, the sun disappears. Their thinking, he suggests, was based on analogy. Simple analogy. Okay, I can throw a stone to hurt someone, so who threw that massive rock? Or a man can use fire, so who brought that huge fire that burned everything? That kind of logic, he says, led them straight to the idea of unseen forces, or spirits.
Right. And it wasn't just stuff happening out there, was it? What about their inner world? That must have played a part.
Oh, absolutely. Crucial. For them, what they sensed, whether they were awake or asleep, it was equally real. So think about dreams. They'd vividly see people who were dead, or maybe people who were miles away. How would they explain that? Or imagine someone faints what they called syncope, or falls into a deep lethargy looking dead and then wakes up. These kinds of experiences would just powerfully reinforce that idea of spirits, of something existing beyond the physical body.
And these first spirits, I'm guessing they weren't exactly angels. Probably pretty scary.
You got it. Crucially, Regnault argues these earliest spirits were often seen as malevolent, as harmful. Which makes sense, right? It reflects the dangerous world they lived in. He points to really early hunter-gatherer groups, like the Fuegians down in Tierra del Fuego, or the Vedas in Sri Lanka. He says they believed mostly in just evil shadows. No complex roles for spirits, no need for worship, or priests, or altars, nothing like that. The Vedas, for instance, were apparently so terrified of thunder it could actually make them physically sick.
Wow. That really does make you pause. If fear, just raw fear, was the first spark for spiritual belief, rather than love or gratitude, what does that tell us?
It's a powerful question. It suggests our most primal connection to the unknown might be rooted in anxiety about it.
Okay, so we start with these frightening shadows born out of fear and confusion. But religions obviously become much more complex. How did Regnault explain that shift? From shadows to, say, the Greek gods on Olympus, or detailed ideas about paradise?
Well, just as human societies got more organized, more complex, so did their beliefs. It mirrored their social structure. Those vague, scary spirits started to get more defined. They gained personalities, roles. They evolved into gods. And Regnault makes this really sharp observation, the idea of a single, supreme god. That often seemed to pop up only when societies became hierarchical, when you had a chief or a king.
Ah, so the divine hierarchy reflects the earthly one.
Exactly. The structure of the heavens mirrored the structure of the tribe or the kingdom. And these gods, like the Olympians you mentioned, were often very human, full of anger, jealousy, playing favorites, just like the people who imagined them.
In this drive to explain things, it must have led to all kinds of wild creation stories.
Oh, absolutely. An explosion of creativity. Regnault gives examples. The Mexican gods trying to make humans out of clay, but the first batch is just inert and watery, so they destroy it and start again. Or Polynesian beliefs about the sky and earth being lovers stuck together until their children, the gods of forests and seas, had to force them apart. They're all attempts to make sense of origins, using the logic and materials available to them.
So our beginnings, our creation myths, reflect our psychology. What about the end? What happens after we die, according to these evolving beliefs?
That, too, Regnault says, was a direct reflection of life on Earth and what people valued. For New Zealanders, who were a warrior culture, Their paradise, their Elysian fields, was basically endless fighting and feasting, what they loved in life. For Tahitians living in a tropical paradise, their afterlife was full of flowers, fruit, and making love with eternally young, beautiful partners.
Sounds pretty good.
Doesn't it? But then you look at the Peruvians. Labor was compulsory in their society. So what was the ultimate reward in their paradise? Doing absolutely nothing. Idleness, while the damned, they had to do hard work.
The ultimate punishment is having a job.
Pretty much. Even the Greenlanders had this grim upper world, cold, hungry, where the aurora borealis was caused by spirits playing ball with a walrus head.
A walrus head, seriously.
Apparently so. But their lower world was pleasant, full of seals and fish that were easy to catch. So yeah, our visions of what comes next seem to be powerful projections of our hopes, fears, and cultural norms.
It's amazing how concrete those projections get. The text also talks about a new group emerging, didn't it? Sorcerers, priests.
Yes, exactly. As beliefs got more structured, you see the rise of specialists, sorcerers, priests, shamans. This was often tied to this idea that a part has the properties of the whole, like sympathetic magic. This thinking leads directly to things like talismans or sacred little charms and venerating relics. Imagine believing the bones of your dead chief could actually help you win a battle if you carried them. Or that the rope used to hang someone held some kind of power.
Even names and images too, right? Believing they held the essence of the person.
Precisely. That the representation was in some way the thing itself.
And it wasn't just about individual belief or magic, was it? How did religion start shaping society itself?
It quickly got woven into the fabric of social order, morality. Think about Polynesian taboos. They weren't always just about respecting the gods. Some regulated who could eat certain foods, bananas, yams, pigs, especially when they were scarce. It was resource management, basically, framed as religious law. Or look at Mazdaism, the ancient Persian religion. It had explicit rules against things like debauchery, abortion, but it also glorified farming, family life, even considered dogs sacred, all presented under divine authority to keep society stable and productive.
Okay, now this feels like where we get to the heart of Rayol's argument, the part highlighted in the title, hypnotism, religion. He draws this really striking link between intense religious stuff and psychological states.
Yes, this is probably one of his most provocative and maybe controversial points. He did this huge survey looking across cultures and history, and he found countless examples where what we'd now likely call hysterical phenomena, things like convulsions, seizures, ecstatic states, were interpreted as divine communication or possession. He talks about prophetic dances among African women where they'd see spirits while surrounded by deafening music, or shamans in New Caledonia going into trances. He even notes the extreme suggestibility and, well, hysteria among northern peoples like the Eskimos or the Samoyeds. Apparently they could faint just from a light touch. He sees this thread of hysteria running through pretty much all religions everywhere at all times.
And the ways people induce these states are just as fascinating. How did they do it?
Oh, all sorts of ways. Often involving intense focus or physical stress, like the Annamite sorcerer in Vietnam using burning incense sticks near the ears, making the person stare at the bright points to induce a hypnotic state. Or the dervishes you hear about, the Sufi mystics in places like Scutari, they'd spin and spin faster and faster until they basically collapsed in ecstasy, their heads rolling back, eyes showing only whites.
Wow.
And then you have the ancient Greek Manads and Bacchantes, followers of the god Dionysus. Their worship involved these frenzied, convulsive dances, doing bizarre contortions that seem to defy balance.
But Rayol wasn't just looking at ancient history or faraway cultures, right? He saw this in his own time, too.
Absolutely. He provides these almost clinical descriptions of cases from 19th century Europe. People like Marie de Moore or Louise Lateau, these women showed well-documented symptoms we'd associate with severe hysteria today. Things like stigmata bleeding from the hands, feet, and side, like crucifixion wounds. They'd go into prolonged ecstatic trances, sometimes for days. Louise Lateau apparently reenacted the entire Passion of Christ every single Friday, complete with the bleeding.
Good grief.
Yeah. Marie de Moore had a history of swallowing things like nails and glass in her youth. These weren't hidden cases either. They became famous. Pilgrims flocked to see them, thousands of people.
So Rayol is suggesting that maybe many famous saints and prophets throughout history were experiencing something similar.
That's the implication, isn't it? That these intense psychological states, perhaps rooted in hysteria or similar conditions, were interpreted by them and by others as direct contact with the divine.
He also mentioned some other strange mental states that kind of blurred the lines.
Yeah, he talks about wandering madness. which he links to things like neurasthenia, sort of chronic fatigue and somnambulism, like sleepwalking, but more complex, altered states. People would travel huge distances with no memory of it, sometimes thinking they were kings or prophets, like the legend of the wandering Jew, maybe, and lethargy again, that deep, death-like sleep. Imagine someone being buried because everyone thought they were dead and then they wake up. That would certainly fuel beliefs in resurrection and the supernatural.
And the idea of the holy fool or the madman as a prophet.
Exactly. He notes that veneration of the mad is found everywhere: the Bible, North Africa, India, China. It shows this ancient recognition that altered mental states weren't just illness. They could be seen as sacred, as touched by the divine.
So these states could happen spontaneously, but people also figured out ways to make them happen, right? To induce ecstasy.
Definitely. Raynal lists a whole catalog of techniques. Prolonged staring was a big one. Fijian priests staring at whale-tooth ornaments, fakirs in India staring at the sun, those Annamite sorcerers with their glowing sticks, fixing the gaze. Strenuous dancing like we saw with the Vedas and dervishes, pushing the body to exhaustion and altered states. Fasting too. Greenlanders, Haitians, Indian yogis, even certain Russian sects practiced extreme fasting to induce visions.
What else?
Intense heat, like sweat lodges used by some indigenous Americans. Regnault thought this could cause cerebral congestion, leading to delirium and hallucinations, and of course, substances. The ancient Aryans used soma, likely from the Asclepias aceta plant. Scythians used cannabis smoke. Medieval sorcerers were associated with solanaceous plants, things like henbane, belladonna, which can cause powerful hallucinations for their supposed sabbats.
So the sorcerers themselves might have been hallucinating.
Brain Knowles suggests exactly that they were often the first victims and first dupes of their own methods, genuinely believing in the experiences that induced hysteria or the substances created.
Okay, so we've seen how these altered states and psychological phenomena could build belief, create gods, inspire rituals, but it wasn't all ecstasy and divine connection. There was a dark side too, right? The sorcerer as a malevolent figure.
Absolutely. Regnault shifts focus to that darker side. The sorcerer wasn't just a conduit to the divine. They could be seen as the source of all misfortune. Sickness, death, failed crops, storm suspicion often fell on someone accused of witchcraft or sorcery, and the consequences were dire. Trials, torture, executions. Think Salem, but happening across cultures and times. He describes some pretty bizarre and often brutal ways they supposedly identified the guilty party. Like in Kaffirland, southern Africa, an old woman might dream who the sorcerer was, and that was enough. Or the Manganyas in Borneo using these charmed sticks that would supposedly drag 4 young men right to the culprit's hut, where they'd often beat the person.
It sounds like mass hysteria and suggestion playing a huge role in these accusations.
Very much so. Collective fear finding a target, often based on flimsy evidence amplified by suggestion.
And then there's that really specific fear, the evil eye.
Ah, the jetator,
Yeah.
yes. The belief that a simple gaze could cause harm. It was incredibly widespread: Italy, North Africa, Australia, you name it. And Renaud even details the supposed physical characteristics of someone with the evil eye. Often someone thin, pale, melancholic, with deep-set eyes, maybe like a toad's. Sometimes they wore glasses to hide them, or maybe they had a crooked nose or red hair.
Red hair? Why red hair?
He notes Judas Iscariot was often depicted with a red beard. It often seemed to be tied to features that were simply uncommon or different from the local norm, making people stand out and thus seem suspicious or somehow other.
This fear of harmful magic seems to lead naturally into ideas about demonic possession, especially later on in the Middle Ages.
Yes, it's a clear progression. Raynaud shows how symptoms we'd now link to hysteria, the contortions, speaking in unknown tongues, which might have been remembered fragments of languages, predicting things, seeming insensitive to pain became the official checklist for demonic possession during exorcisms. He uses the famous trial of Urbain Grandier in Loudun, France, as a prime example. The nuns accusing him displayed these incredibly dramatic physical behaviors, twisting into arches, touching the floor only with toes and nose, which were taken as absolute proof of demonic influence orchestrated by Grandier.
But belief wasn't just a weapon for harm. Reno flips it around, doesn't he? He talks about healing, too.
He does. This is where he states quite clearly, faith can also heal. He argues that miracles of healing reported across all religions are essentially demonstrations of hypnotism or suggestion. He points to figures like Paracelsus, the Renaissance physician, who apparently realized way back then that amulets worked by suggestion. It didn't matter if the amulet was real or fake. If the person believed it would work, it often did, because of their imagination and confidence. Even in Rednoll's own time, late 19th century, he mentions miracle workers or thaumaturges, like a man named Schlatter in Colorado, who supposedly healed thousands using blessed gloves. Rednoll saw this as pure suggestion at work.
So for healing, to work through suggestion, what did Reynal think was needed?
Two key things, based on his analysis, especially in biblical accounts. First, the faith of the healed. He points to the Gospels, Matthew and Mark, where it says Jesus couldn't perform any miracles in certain places because of the people's unbelief.
Right, you have to believe it can happen.
Exactly. And second, the faith of the operator, the healer. They need absolute certainty in their words, total assurance in their gaze. That conviction is what allows them to effectively use suggestion. Just like the early apostles who reportedly healed the sick and cast out demons, it's this powerful psychological dynamic between the healer and the healed.
This power of suggestion and belief, then, wasn't just personal. Regnall argues it shaped huge events, even wars.
Yes, he really scales it up. He argues that religious faith has historically been one of the most potent forms of suggestion you could possibly use in battle. Think about it. The belief that God protects you makes you feel invincible. It gives soldiers incredible courage, maybe even superhuman strength, because why would you retreat if you're certain heaven is literally on your side? He talks about ancient practices, sacrifices before battle, consulting oracles for divine advice, and the power of visions, like Castor and Pollux supposedly appearing to help the Romans fight Tarquin, or the Emperor Theodosius dreaming of 2 knights in white promising him victory.
And this continued right into Christian times.
Absolutely. Constantine's vision of the cross in the sky, hoc signo vinces, by this sign you will conquer. That supposedly led him to convert and win a crucial battle. Clovis, the Frankish king, praying to his wife Clotilde's god for victory against the Alemanni and winning. The Crusades were fueled by this intense religious fervor, often boosted by visions nights, seeing St. George or St. Demetrius fighting alongside them, or seeing a whole celestial army descend at Antioch.
Even figures like Joan of Arc.
He mentions Jeanne d'Arc explicitly. Her inspiration, he says, wrote one of the most beautiful and purest pages of our history, directly linking her incredible impact to the power of her divinely inspired belief and her ability to instill that belief in others.
But what if things went wrong? If the omens were bad?
Then it could be catastrophic. Bad omens could completely shatter an army's morale. Suggestion works both ways. He also notes how physical objects become imbued with this power through belief. Aztec warriors wearing bits of tiger skin to gain the animal's strength and ferocity. Warriors in New Britain wearing masks made from the skulls or heads of dead chiefs, believing they could absorb their courage. These weren't just decorations, they were psychological tools.
So a general's job wasn't just tactics, it was also managing belief.
Reina definitely emphasizes that. A great general needed skill in obtaining good omens or interpreting events favorably and instilling confidence through suggestion. He compares it to Napoleon carefully cultivating his image, his star of destiny. He even brings up Bismarck, arguing his clever political maneuvering, his Machiavellian combinations to manipulate public opinion and provoke the Franco-Prussian War was actually a more powerful strategic weapon than pure military science. It was psychological warfare, essentially.
Okay, so we've gone from individual psychology to belief systems to healing to warfare, but Ridnoll didn't stop there. He looked beyond humans, too, into the animal kingdom.
He did, which is quite fascinating. He includes a whole section on animal hypnotism, arguing that this power of suggestion, or maybe intense fear response, isn't exclusively human. He cites observations, some scientific for the time, some maybe more anecdotal. Vipers being fascinated or seemingly hypnotized by humans, chickens being immobilized just by drawing a chalk line in front of them or holding their head down, even a tiny fly paralyzing a huge cockroach 5 times its size, apparently just through some kind of paralyzing suggestion or sting, allowing it to drag the immobilized roach away.
And the cockroach just stays put.
Stays completely motionless even if the fly leaves for a bit. Rednoll presents these as natural phenomena, likely rooted in fear responses and suggestion, not magic. He also mentions tumbler pigeons, a specific breed that has this inherited neurological issue, like hysterical convulsions, making them do involuntary flips in the air, sometimes fatally, an inherited infirmity.
So from animal hypnotism, he then turns to those unexplained human phenomena, things often linked to spiritualism and mediums, like thought reading.
Right. He tries to find a psychological explanation here, too. He talks about hyperacuity of the senses, the idea that when someone is hypnotized, their senses can become incredibly sharp. They might perceive tiny details others miss, like a minuscule flaw on a paper, even if their eyes seem closed. This heightened perception, he suggests, could explain things like thought reading. The hypnotized person isn't actually reading minds, but unconsciously picking up on incredibly subtle cues, tiny muscle movements in the questioner's face or body, slight changes in breathing clues the questioner isn't even aware they're giving off.
Like how a highly attuned person, maybe someone blind, can sometimes sense things others don't.
Exactly that kind of principle. He even mentions this was used as a form of justice in some societies, a diviner staring intensely at a suspect, judging guilt based on those involuntary micro-reactions.
So for Regnault, phenomena like telepathy or even levitation weren't necessarily supernatural.
He was skeptical. He acknowledged the vast number of stories people having prophetic dreams, seeing events happening far away, saints or apostles supposedly levitating. But he stressed the crucial problem. These things couldn't be reliably reproduced under scientific conditions. Many claims just didn't hold up to testing. He also tackles the idea of animals having a sense of direction being telepathy. He argues it's much more likely based on incredibly good memory for landmarks, subtle environmental cues, not mind reading.
So how did he view the spiritualist movements that were popular in his time with mediums and seances?
He basically saw Spiritism as a kind of modern religion built directly on these hypnotic and suggestive phenomena, turning tables, mediums, channeling spirits. He saw these as misinterpretations of psychological effects. He mentions figures like Swedenborg, the 18th century scientist turned mystic, who claimed he could leave his body and chat with spirits for almost 30 years, chosen by God to found a new church. And Allan Kardec, the founder of Spiritism as a codified doctrine, with his detailed theories about reincarnation and the perisprit, the sort of semi-material body linking the soul and the physical form. Regnault presents them as founders of new belief systems, driven by the same enduring human need to understand the unknown and connect with something beyond death, but ultimately using psychological mechanisms, perhaps unconsciously, to do so.
So after exploring all these threads in Regnault's century-old analysis, what's the big takeaway for us today?
I think the biggest thing is realizing the sheer power of our own minds, often unconsciously to shape, sustain, and also be shaped by our beliefs. Whether we label these experiences as divine or cultural or psychological, that fundamental human drive to explain things, to find meaning in the unexplained, is clearly central to who we are. Renault's work really pushes you to look critically at the roots of belief and acknowledge the hidden influence of our own psychology.
Yeah, we've really covered a lot of ground, from those first basic questions early humans asked, through how gods and afterlives evolved, the really fascinating links to hysteria and suggestion. Then looking at belief in extreme situations like healing and warfare, and even how these mental forces might play out in animals or explain seemingly paranormal events. So maybe the final thought to leave you with is this. How much of what you accept as real, as true, even right now, might be subtly shaped by suggestion, by belief, by the hidden workings of your own mind? Just like the phenomena Renault was trying to unpack over 100 years ago. What are your minds telling you?